This Bronco has been in my family longer than I have, over 30 years. It brought me home from the hospital when I was a baby. This is what I learned to wrench on, and now it's what my kids are learning to wrench on. So this is more than just a build breakdown listing out all the parts on this thing. This is a chronicle of my childhood. This is 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears culminating in what you see here. Let's start the story off at the very beginning, all right? 1990, my parents, pregnant with my older brother, are looking for a little bit more family-friendly vehicle than, you know, a 68 fastback like my dad was cruising around at the time. So they look into Auto Trader, because that's what you do in 1990 before Craigslist or Marketplace or anything like that, which is probably a good thing. There's a lot less. Is this still available? Is this still available? Bye. If you remember, Auto Trader was all in black and white. You had to pay extra to get color images for your ad, and this one, they were skimpy. They weren't paying extra for that. It's just not worth it. The whole drive up there, my dad's saying, I hope it isn't green. I hope it isn't green. I hope it isn't green. Pull around the corner, and of course, it's green. But the deal is too good to pass up. It's exactly what they needed, so he ended up getting it. And I just think that's kind of a funny little detail, because this thing is kind of, you know, known for this green color that it has on it now. And this isn't the color that it was back then when they got it, but it's kind of its signature now, and it's my favorite color. It's just funny because it's something my dad was like, please don't let it be green. Even though it was green, they get it off Auto Trader, but then my dad has this hereditary condition that kicked in, and I think he honestly may have passed it down to me as well, but where you just can't leave shit alone. Can't leave it stock. You just can't. It's wrong. So the first thing was paint. He obviously wasn't a fan of the green, so he chose green to repaint it. Now, don't kill me. A lot of you have asked, what is the paint code on this? What is the color? It's actually just a pearl emerald green from a 1990s Dodge, and he saw the color on the Dodge, was like, I bet that would look sharp on the Bronco, and sure enough, it does. It gets a lot of compliments on the color, even though this paint has seen better days. We'll get into that. Now, mind you, my dad was always a little bit more into, you know, drag racing and hot rods than he was the off-road scene. So it made sense that one of the first things he did was throw a big block in this thing. So it got a nice healthy 460 that lived in the thing for, gosh, 10 plus years or so. But it slowly started evolving from less of a family hauler and a kind of a daily driver into more of a toy. And we started using it on the weekends, going out off-roading. And going camping in it, doing a bunch of stuff. So naturally, the upgrades follow suit. It's that hereditary condition we have where you just, you got to make it better all the time. The upgrades started under the hood. Now, I mentioned that it had a 460 in it already. However, it was starting to get a little bit tired. The bearings on the bottom end actually needed some attention. So my dad built a 473 cubic inch big block to replace it, which was a lot spicier than what was in it before. And when you're a kid, 550 horsepower feels like 1,000. Sorry to everybody I went to high school with, because I probably talked about this thing endlessly. They were like, oh, you know, my dad could beat up your dad. Whoa, we have a Bronco. Now, I mentioned my dad was a talented machinist as well, and he actually owned and operated his own CNC machine shop for 15 years or so on the same property as our house. So as you can imagine, that hereditary condition just makes it to where you go out after hours and start building cool shit for this. One of the cool things that he built was an adapter to mate this big block to an NV4500. He wanted to throw a 5-speed in there to be able to have overdrive and shift your own gears, because it's just more fun.
Feel the gears and you feel the brrr. I like it.
So he adapted an NV4500 to the big block, and then adapted that NV4500 to the MP205, did a twin stick kit on the NP205, so the drivetrain in this thing was pretty stout. Now, if anyone remembers Cage Off-Road, you probably remember they make some cool suspension goodies for these. Jim, the man behind Cage Off-Road, happens to be one of our really good family friends. We started going off-roading together. My dad did some machine work for him, and eventually my brother even married his daughter. So really great friends of ours, and that resulted in this thing getting some pretty serious suspension upgrades. ended up getting his long arm kit with dual shock hoops and progressive rate coils and a lot of other goodies thrown at it that helped it really perform off-road. This thing articulates well. I mean, we've hucked it in the air more times than I can count, and it's handled it all. By 2008, the Bronco's kind of in its final form of what it will look like when I take ownership. And over the last few years, it's been used and abused pretty hard. We went to TSF and went rock crawling and doing some trails. It's been to Spin Reel, Winchester Bay, all over the Northwest as far as dunes. It's been to Moab, Utah, Easter Jeep Safari. I mean, it's been jumped, leaned against rocks, you name it, this thing's seen it. So it's been ridden hard and put away wet for the last few years. And on one of the last trips we took, we went to Sand Lake, which is kind of our local dune spot, about an hour and a half from our house. And cruising across the flats, oil pressure goes down. My dad shuts it off. We kind of tear into it when we get home and find out that the oil pump where the pedestal mounts snapped off, killing the oil pressure in the engine and burning up the bearings in the bottom end. So my dad stuffs this thing in the shop, plans on building, a new motor for it, refreshing the motor that was in it. But a lot of life happens. My brother leaves for the military, I leave for the military, my dad transitions into a new career at a new business, and a lot of life just gets in the way of ever finishing this thing. So it sits all the way until about 2015. By this time, my brother and I have been in the military for a few years, so we're not doing family wheeling trips anymore, and the Bronco kind of sits in my dad's shop and just gathers dust. And he starts to realize he's not gonna have time to finish the Bronco build and his 68 Fastback, because that eventually came back into his life and he wants to build it as well. So the Bronco's gotta go. I could not fathom the thought of my entire childhood living in somebody else's driveway, so I had to come up with a way to be able to buy it, and I didn't have money at the time. I had just come back from 2 years overseas living in Japan. I had just bought a house. I didn't have the cash to throw down on something like this. So I knew I had to get a little bit creative and find a solution to where I could keep this Bronco in the family and my dad could still get the money to build his Mustang. So I suggested a trade. My 68 F100 four-wheel drive short bed straight across for his Bronco with no engine included. Whew, it's windy in Idaho. But that was the trade, straight across my 68 F100 for the Bronco without an engine, and he went for it. Now, why that truck is still in my driveway is a story for another time, but that deal worked out perfectly because I had only paid $3,500 for that truck. I got a steal of a deal on it, so I was able to use that to kind of leverage my position and get the Bronco and keep it in the family. He was able to sell the truck and get the funds he needed for a 68 Fastback build. So it made everybody happy, the perfect solution to keep this thing in the family. So once the Bronco was in its final home with me in Idaho, the first order of business was obviously putting an engine in it, right? So I was really excited. I found another 429 off Craigslist. I was like, boom, perfect. We'll slap that thing in it, and it's gonna be kind of reminiscent of what it used to be, a mid 500 horsepower big block, and it still had all the half tons and everything. It was just like I left it in my childhood. That's what I'm gonna recreate with that engine. And found some goofy things upon inspection, tearing this thing down, and it grew to earn the nickname Flaky the 429, because every single component in this thing was coated in overspray. I mean, the crank, the pistons, rods, everything. The top of the heads were painted. Everything was this flaky, god-awful Ford blue that was just everywhere. So tore it all down, cleaned it all up. Half the pistons were in backwards. They're 180 degrees oriented from where they should be, so the fly cuts were in the wrong place. It got really lucky that when the guy did run it, he didn't slap valves into pistons. It was just all sorts of goofy, a lot of red flags. But I get the thing running. I put the Sniper EFI on it and everything, and it sounds good. It shot out a rat's nest from the exhaust that had made its home over the last 10 years that it sat in my dad's shop. Which was pretty funny until I checked the oil and then realized there was a lot of material in the oil that should not be in the oil. So I cut apart the oil filter. Sure enough, there's a lot of debris in there. It looked like cam material or some sort of metallic flaky goodness in there. So I pull the engine back out, start going through it, and there's no smoking guns. The cam wasn't wiped out when I first fired it up. Everything was looking as it should. So I came to kind of realize that this guy had wiped a cam in it upon break-in, which is why it had such low miles on it, and everything was kind of half assembled because he had torn it apart, realized he had a flat cam, stuffed a new cam in there, and then been like, hey, it's good to go, and sold it to me, which is a shit thing to do because he didn't flush out all the oil galleys and everything. So there's a lot of material, just residual material in the block that needed cleansed and flushed out of there that wasn't. So it ended up taking out the bearings in the bottom end. And at this point, I'm like, you know what? I may as well just build it. Something cool, something that I want. So that's why I built this. A 545 cubic inch big block. Now this started life as a 460. It has a D9 block, which has been bored 30 over, but they have a little bit deeper cylinder bore on those blocks, so you don't get as much piston rock with a big stroker crank. This does have a 4.5 inch crank, and that combined with that slight overboard gets you to 545 cubic inches. But really I wanted something mild and street friendly, low maintenance. That's why it has a dual plane intake and a hydraulic flat tappet cam. It really is, turnkey and go, and I haven't had to mess with it a ton, and it's been a blast. If you want more details on this, I do have another video breaking this engine down in a little bit more detail. I'm probably gonna do another video that's better and just more detail on this build and some reasoning behind the decisions I made. Now, in the middle of building that 545, this weird COVID thing happened. You guys probably heard about it. But anyways, I didn't have to work for like a month. And I was like, hey, I know where there's a set of Super Duty axles that I can shove under this thing, under my other Bronco, which is torn apart. Doesn't need them. So that's what I did. These are 2003 Super Duty axles, which in hindsight, I would have loved to have put 2005 and newer axles under this because they come with 35 spline stub shafts and they're just an overall stouter unit, but these were free. I already had them. I did this swap, back my senior year of high school on my other Bronco, and it's getting TTB now, so it didn't need it anymore. Bada bing, bada boom, here they is. To mount these 1-ton axles to these radius arms, I used Bloody Knuckle Garage's kit. So that's a weldable C that adapts the clamshell style radius arms to an axle that doesn't have those clamshells on it like the Dana 44s come with. So that's a perfect adaptation to use it with these Dana 60 front ends. It's the same radius arms that were under it, the same cage off-road radius arms, but these are made by Bloody Knuckle Garage, which is Jim's new company, so he's still pumping these things out. Also his dual shock hoops up there, which are the original cage ones, and some Philistines. I know that's what you're looking at right now. Why is there no front drive shaft? You Bluetooth drive shaft fucking SEMA build. You don't even use your truck. Okay, the front drive shaft is out right now because the transfer case is leaking, so I need to rebuild the output up there and reseal it. So that's why it's out. Get off me. Again, it's filthy under here because it gets driven, but this is the rear end, Sterling 10.5 inch. So this comes with disc brakes from the factory, and it's a real stout rear end. I'm still on the hunt for an electronic factory locker to stuff in this and re-gear it because they both still need re-geared really badly. But I'm running Deaver 4-inch leafs and then a cambered extended shackle in the back that gives you about 4 inches of lift or so. And then the drive lines were actually just the stock Super Duty drive lines, and then we cut them down and shortened them for the 1-ton conversion and got 4-bolt flanges on the output of the 205 to adapt them to the Super Duty style, and it's been a really great setup. The exhaust system is a full 3-inch stainless pie cut system with dual Black Widow neighbor haters stuffed in there, and then I made these exhaust bezels. If you want more detail on the exhaust system, there's a whole nother video that I did breaking that down in more detail. As far as interior goes, it was pretty nice when I got it. It had these Mastercraft reclinable bucket seats in there already, but the carpet had to go. I put Pour 15 down on the floors and then sound deadened it and added new carpet, which you can't even tell because after this winter it's disgusting. It also had these gauges in it as well from my father. I added the Sniper EFI, and then I also added these shifters, which is kind of fun, kind of goofy. Not sure if I'll keep it forever, but that's what we're doing with inside. For wheels and tires, I went with these 39-inch BFGs and Walker Evans beadlocks. These Walker Evans beadlocks were actually on my other Bronco because it had the same 8-on-170 bolt pattern, so I just used them on this. My other Bronco is now 5-lug. That's actually the 9-inch from under this truck originally. is under this one now, and it's got some new walkers on it too. Surprise, surprise. But these work perfect for it. They fit the look. The 39s are a little bit bigger than I would have liked. It needs the fenders trimmed or some bump stops added to keep the tires out of the fender, and it's kind of stopped me from being able to wheel it as hard as I've wanted to the last couple years. So one of the two has to happen. I don't want to cut the fenders though. I left a lot of details out, but that's kind of the gist of this 35-year story on this Bronco and where it's at now, although there's a lot that I still want to do to this. So follow along because it needs paint. First and foremost, that's what's coming next. This thing needs a paint job really bad. It's showing its age. The paint is older than me and it's aging like me, which is badly, so it needs addressed. Some of the other things is suspension. I would really love to get this thing on coilovers in the front and be able to adjust the ride height and kind of fine tune it where I want. A cage is top priority in this thing, so it needs a full roll cage. It's got that factory GT bar. Those things are made out of poop pipe, and a real rollover is not gonna save you. And I have my kids in this thing, and I plan on starting to wheel this thing again soon, so it really needs a full cage. It needs coilovers, it needs paint. It's got lots of stuff coming on the horizon for this, provided I don't go bankrupt. Pray for me. So follow along, because there's more coming on the Bronco, and we didn't even talk about this one behind me. This is a 79 Bronco that I've had since high school. It was my second vehicle ever, drove it all the way through high school, and it's getting long travel suspension, a 545 cubic inch big block as well, TTB, so independent front suspension. Lots more coming on that one, and there's the 68 F100 in the driveway that somehow made its way back into my life. So follow along on that build as well. Lots more to come on the channel. Thank you for those that have transitioned over from Instagram or from TikTok or wherever you found me and started watching these videos. I sincerely appreciate it. I'm still figuring out YouTube and these longer format videos, but I really enjoy being able to give you all more detail, be able to go a little bit more into depth on these subjects. So follow along. I promise the videos will only get better.